There is a story told in the mess halls of conclave warships, whispered between veterans who have seen things that their official reports carefully omit, passed down through the oral traditions of 17 different species who were present at the Vareth tribunal, and it begins, as the most important stories always do, not with a battle, but with a silence. The silence came first. That is the detail every witness remembers most vividly, more than the light, more than the sound that followed, more than the devastation that reshaped the geopolitical architecture of the known galaxy for the next 400 years. The silence. Because for 63 years, humanity had been speaking, and the galactic conclave had been deciding, collectively and with extraordinary bureaucratic efficiency, not to listen. 63 years. To understand what that means, you have to understand what humans were asking for during those 6 decades, and you have to understand it not as a political abstraction, but as a lived reality. They were asking for the Vareth Compact to be enforced, a treaty the conclave itself had authored, had celebrated, had used as a cornerstone example of galactic civilization's moral evolution. The compact was simple in its language and profound in its intent. No member species would engage in resource extraction on an inhabited world without the full, documented, uncoerced consent of its people. Simple, clear, enforceable. And for 63 years, the Drog hegemony, a species of vast industrial capacity and vaster political connections within the conclave, had been violating it on Earth without pause, without shame, and without consequence. They had begun with the deep ocean trenches, mining rare minerals from ecosystems that human scientists had spent generations studying. They moved to the polar regions when human protests became inconvenient, establishing extraction facilities beneath the ice in formations that destabilized glacial structures and contributed to flooding patterns across 3 continents. When Earth's unified government filed its 417th formal complaint with the Conclave's Resolution Council, the Council had responded with a committee. When the committee filed its report 18 months later recommending further study, humanity had responded with what it always responded with during this period: patience. Dignified, exhausting, increasingly brittle patience. The Drog had a saying among their diplomatic corps, roughly translated as, "The ones who keep talking are the ones who cannot act." They applied it to humans with something that passed for affection in their culture, an almost fond condescension, the way one might regard a creature that barks fiercely, but has never once bitten. Humans complained beautifully. They wrote devastating legal briefs. Their representatives at conclave sessions delivered speeches of such emotional precision that translation matrices often struggled to convey the full weight of them. Not because the words were untranslatable, but because many species had never developed linguistic structures capable of carrying that specific combination of grief and righteousness simultaneously. The speeches were admired. They were applauded sometimes. They changed nothing. And through all of it, humanity kept its patience. It kept its patience when the fishing yields off the Pacific coast dropped by 40% due to drog extraction activity. It kept its patience when 3 Bangladeshi coastal cities required emergency relocation due to flooding patterns the drog's polar operations had accelerated. It kept its patience when a drog hegemony representative, in a private session that was leaked to the galactic press 6 months later, referred to Earth's population as a manageable inconvenience. It kept its patience, and it kept talking, and the conclave kept forming committees, and the drog kept mining, and 63 years passed in this fashion like water wearing down stone. Except the stone was human endurance, and it was wearing down faster than anyone outside of Earth's strategic command had been permitted to know. What the galaxy did not understand about human patience, what the drog had catastrophically failed to research, and what the conclave's political analysts had filed away under cultural quirk without examining its operational implications, was that it was not passive. Human patience, in the historical record, was never the patience of acceptance. It was the patience of preparation. It was the specific, focused, almost meditative discipline of a species that had learned, across millennia of internal conflict, that acting too early was frequently more costly than waiting for the precisely correct moment. Every culture on Earth had a version of this wisdom. Some expressed it through martial philosophy, some through chess, some through the agricultural rhythms of civilizations that had learned to read seasons rather than fight them. But the core of it was always the same. Wait until you are ready, not until you are angry. Because anger comes quickly and passes. Readiness is something you build. Admiral Yara Chin had been building for 11 years. She had not been given permission to build. She had not been ordered to build. She had, in fact, been explicitly instructed by 3 successive Earth governments, each more diplomatically cautious than the last, to maintain a purely defensive posture and to allow the legal process to proceed. She had complied with these instructions with complete technical fidelity, which is to say she had done exactly what she was told to do while simultaneously doing a number of things she had not been told not to do, because she was a woman who understood the precise geometry of the space between orders. She had spent 11 years in that space, working quietly, sleeping very little, and building something that had no official name in Earth's military registry because it had no official existence. She called it, in her private logs that would later be declassified and read by strategic analysts across 40 species, with expressions ranging from admiration to existential unease, the Reckoning Fleet. It was not the largest fleet Earth had ever assembled. It was not equipped with the most advanced weapons in Earth's arsenal, because Earth's most advanced weapons were still officially classified as theoretical. What the Reckoning Fleet had, in quantities that defied the Conclave's intelligence estimates by a factor that caused at least one senior analyst to request early retirement upon seeing the figures, was precision. Every vessel, every crew, every contingency plan, nested inside contingency plans, rehearsed until the rehearsal itself was indistinguishable from the real thing. Yara Chin had not built a hammer. She had built a scalpel of such extraordinary refinement that it could remove a malignancy from the body of the galaxy without disturbing the tissue around it. Whether she would be permitted to use it depended entirely on what happened in the next 72 hours at the Vareth Tribunal. The tribunal had been humanity's final formal request. Not a complaint. Not a petition. A request for a verdict, binding, enforceable, and delivered within a specified time frame, on whether the Drog hegemony was in violation of the Vareth Compact and what remediation the Conclave intended to enforce. Earth's representative, Ambassador Kofi Mensah, had stood before the full council and delivered what witnesses would later describe as the most precisely devastating diplomatic address in the Conclave's recorded history. He had laid out 63 years of violations, 63 years of committees, 63 years of flooding coastlines and dying ecosystems and displaced populations, and he had ended with 9 words that the translation matrices rendered with unusual difficulty, because the emotional frequency underneath them was something the matrix's designers had not anticipated needing to encode. He said, "We will not ask again. We are asking now." The council had requested a recess to deliberate. The recess was scheduled for 48 hours. It ran to 72. At the end of 72 hours, they announced a new committee. Ambassador Mensah received the notification on a Tuesday morning, local Earth time, sitting in a small office adjacent to the Conclave's main chamber with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He read the notification twice. He set it face down on the desk. He sat for a long moment with his hands folded in front of him, looking at the wall, and then he picked up his secure comm unit and made a single call that lasted 4 seconds. The call connected to Admiral Yara Chun, who was sitting in the command center of the ESNS Unyielding in a parking orbit behind Earth's moon, and the 4-second call consisted of 3 words. "It's a committee." There was a pause of approximately 2 seconds, long enough to be human, short enough to be military. Then Chun said, "Understood," and the line closed. What happened in the next 6 hours was not a declaration of war. Humanity was very precise about this, then, and in every subsequent historical account, because the distinction mattered enormously to them in a way that took other species decades to fully appreciate. A declaration of war implies the beginning of hostilities. What Earth issued at 0900 hours on that Tuesday was a declaration of remediation. A legal document of extraordinary thoroughness, citing chapter and verse of the Vareth Compact, itemizing every violation, quantifying every damage, and specifying with surgical exactness what would be remediated, by whom, and by what method. It was filed simultaneously with the Conclave's legal registry, every member species' diplomatic mission, and the Drog Hegemony's home council. It was signed by every member of Earth's unified government. It was also broadcast, unencrypted, on every communication frequency the Drog Hegemony used for military coordination. That last detail was not an accident. The Reckoning Fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Drog's primary extraction zone at 0923 hours. They did not fire. They broadcast the declaration of remediation on all frequencies. They established a perimeter around every active Drog extraction facility on and around Earth with a precision that the Drog's own tactical analysts would later describe, in classified briefings, as unreasonably perfect. And then Admiral Chen opened a direct channel to the Drog Hegemony's supreme military commander, a figure whose name translated as something like, "He who crushes opposition beneath his advance." And she said, in a voice so calm it registered on the Drog commander's emotional frequency sensors as an entirely new category, something their equipment had no existing label for. "You have 24 hours to begin withdrawal." Everything that happens after that is a consequence, not an escalation. We want to be very clear about the distinction. The Drog commander's first instinct was to be contemptuous. His second instinct, arriving approximately 4 seconds later when his tactical team finished their analysis of the fleet configuration before him, was something considerably more complex. The Drog Hegemony did not withdraw within 24 hours. This is recorded in every galactic history text that covers the period, usually with a footnote that attempts to explain the decision and consistently fails to do it justice, because the honest explanation is simply that they did not believe it. 63 years of human restraint had built a model in the Drog strategic consciousness that was very difficult to revise in 24 hours. The model said, humans talk. Humans file complaints. Humans write brilliant legal documents and deliver speeches that make translation matrices struggle and change absolutely nothing. Because that is what humans do, and the distance between their words and their actions is the ocean in which the Drog Hegemony had been swimming, profitably, for 6 decades. The model was wrong. The model had always been wrong. It had simply never been tested. Admiral Chen had given the order to her fleet commanders 2 hours before the deadline expired, because she wanted every system warm, every crew member rested, and every contingency already loaded. When the 24th hour passed, and the Drog extraction facilities remained operational, what followed was not the thunderous, indiscriminate assault the Drog commanders had been quietly preparing to absorb, and then use, as a political grievance before the conclave. It was something far more unsettling. Humanity's first action was to disable, not destroy, disable, the power generation systems of every Drog extraction facility simultaneously, across 3 planetary bodies, with a synchronization that was so precise it had to be reviewed 3 times by Drog technical staff before they accepted that it had actually happened. The facilities went dark. Their crews were unharmed. Their equipment was untouched. They simply stopped working, as though a very large and very calm hand had reached down and turned off the lights. The second action was the quarantine. Every Drog vessel in the operational theater found itself enclosed in an interdiction field, technology the Conclave's intelligence assessments had listed as in early developmental stages for humanity, which said more about the quality of the Conclave's intelligence assessments than it did about humanity's developmental timeline. The quarantine was total. Nothing entered, nothing exited. The Drog fleet was not threatened. It was simply held, with the effortless authority of something that had decided it was done negotiating and was now simply managing the situation. The Drog commander sent 17 increasingly urgent messages to his home council in the first 4 hours. He sent 6 messages to the Conclave. He sent 1 message directly to Admiral Chen. Her response arrived in 40 seconds and contained 4 sentences. The extraction stops today. Your people are safe. Your equipment will be returned when withdrawal is complete. This is the part where you decide how long this takes. The Conclave convened an emergency session. For the first time in 63 years, the session was not about forming a committee. The full remediation took 11 days. The Drog hegemony withdrew its operations from Earth and the surrounding system in stages, each stage verified by human inspectors whose thoroughness was such that Drog logistical commanders later admitted, in memoirs published decades afterward, that they had found it simultaneously infuriating and quietly impressive. Every facility was catalogued. Every piece of removed equipment was documented. Every site was assessed for environmental damage, and the assessment figures, compiled by a joint team of human scientists and independent Conclave observers, formed the basis of a remediation invoice that the Drog hegemony would spend the next 40 years paying, not in political concessions, not in vague promises of future cooperation, but in the specific, measurable, monitored restoration of every ecosystem they had damaged. The invoice was not punitive. That was the detail that disturbed the Drog leadership most, in retrospect, the fact that it was not punitive. It was precise. It asked for exactly what had been taken, and not 1 unit more, which meant humanity had calculated it in advance, which meant humanity had been ready for this outcome long before it arrived. Admiral Chen decommissioned the Reckoning Fleet 6 weeks after the withdrawal was complete. She did not give a speech. She signed the decommissioning orders in her office with the same coffee cup she kept on her desk, refilled now, and she submitted her retirement papers the same afternoon. When journalists asked her, in the months that followed, what she wanted people to understand about what had happened, she was quiet for a long moment. The pause of someone who has chosen their words with the same care they once chose their coordinates. Then she said, "We didn't lose our patience. People keep saying that. We didn't lose it. We spent it. There's a difference. Losing something means it's gone. Spending it means you got something for it." She did not elaborate. She had never been a woman who felt the need to explain herself twice. What the galaxy learned in those 11 days. What every species in the Conclave has been quietly integrating into its strategic and diplomatic models ever since, is something that resists simple formulation but insists on being understood. It is this: patience is not weakness. In the human case, patience was the most dangerous weapon they possessed, because it meant that every action, when it finally came with 63 years of accumulated precision behind it. It came with legal documentation so thorough, it was essentially unarguable. It came with technology that had been developed in the space between being told to stand down and not being told to stop thinking. It came with crews who had rehearsed this so many times that the real thing felt, to them, like the final repetition of something they had already mastered. The Drog had looked at human restraint and seen submission. What they had actually been looking at, for 63 years, was a civilization quietly becoming absolutely certain that when it finally moved, it would not miss. No species that was present at the Vareth tribunal has forgotten it. No species that received the broadcast of Chen's four-sentence message has ever quite recovered the comfortable assumption that patience implies limitation. And in the conclave's halls today, when a human representative rises to speak and the chamber goes quiet, that particular quiet, the one with weight in it, it is not out of politeness. It is because every species in that room has done the same quiet calculation and arrived at the same conclusion. They are not listening to a species that is asking. They are listening to a species that is choosing. And the choosing, as a certain Marine once said in a different room, on a different day, at the beginning of what turned out to be a very long education for the galaxy, the choosing is always the part worth paying attention to.